Welcome again to our study of Jamgon Mipham's Sword of Wisdom. And as always, kindly generate the intention to approach the topic, the subject, the Dharma, the Buddha Dharma, with the understanding that we're not studying an ism, or we're not studying a particular cultural creation, a set of ideas, but rather on the basis of sages who have seen the nature of reality. We're then looking at what the sages are pointing out to us in terms of observing and knowing our reality. We're not being asked to believe in anything. We're not being asked to follow a particular set of cultural practices, but we're being asked to have a look at what the nature of reality is, and also to recognize how our lack of understanding the nature of reality causes so much suffering. The fact that we can't cope and that we can't be comfortable in reality, which we humbly need to acknowledge, that does happen universally. Practically every micro moment of the experience of a sentient being is permeated what we call all-pervasive suffering, but also the more obvious kinds of suffering, the suffering of suffering, the suffering of change. All of these experiences of suffering, they come about on the basis of a mistaken understanding of our reality. So the sage is not interested in us subscribing to his or her teaching. The Buddha is not interested in having followers. But what the Buddha is interested in is for us to penetrate and awaken from a delusional condition that causes unnecessary suffering. And when we see this is what the nature of the Dharma is, that's when we're motivated to study and practice the Dharma, and not just for ourselves, but recognizing how everyone, everywhere, at all times are suffering, to then intend to apply ourselves, to study and apply these insights so that we can benefit others, so that we can follow in the footsteps of the sages whose entire being is directed by and informed by a wish to set others free. And particularly when we come to a text like this, which is what we call epistemology, which is valid insight. This is so important before almost we approach Buddhism in any way, because until we've established what we could call the epistemic foundations of Buddhism and see how they concur with what we accept as valid knowledge, then Buddhism will be misunderstood as a religion. Because Buddhism deals with consciousness, because we have a science that does not exclude consciousness, but where the very foundation of understanding our reality is insight into that which perceives and constructs reality, and that is consciousness. But it's so often that the theme of consciousness, and particularly when you talk about the phenomenology of awakening, the experience of awakening, and the insights into that which is not ordinarily known, that then becomes labeled as religion. And that would be okay if we really understood what religion is supposed to mean according to its etymology, which is religare, to reconnect or connect with reality. But that's also where science is a religion, because science is also about connecting with reality, knowing reality. So all due respect to our present modern science, but the fact that Buddhism gets labeled as a religion effectively results in it being disqualified as a valid understanding of reality. And this is so pervasive in sort of very loud ways, with, you could say, all the arguments and possibly very rigid positions that so-called agnostics or skeptics they take, right down to just very ordinary assumptions that permeate our discourse, in which we say, oh yeah, well, these things we'll never understand. Even the sort of promissory science that says, well, we don't understand it presently, but because we're such a valid science, or our foundations are so valid, we'll understand it in the future. So we have, and also recently I was just leading a retreat where there were some of the participants who, coming from another Buddhist tradition, wouldn't want to read the liturgy because they said, oh no, this is religious. We just want to practice mindfulness. We don't want the religious part of Buddhism. And that's where this is sad, right? This is where you realize that what is skillful means, and of course just adapt it to particular individuals at particular times according to, you could say, the conventions, and skillfully engaging in so many different ways. We have throughout the Buddhist teaching an incredibly variety of skillful ways in which we engage reality, not engage something that's nonsensical or superstitious. So that's where it is so valuable that right from the start, when we approach the Buddhist teaching, that we are aware of the fact that we are not delving into metaphysics or belief systems, but we are continually touching on what we can directly experience or logically infer. So that's where we have an incredibly valuable heritage in a text such as this. And this particular Jamgon Mipham Sword of Wisdom is a text that's studied widely and continually referred to, not just in the Nyingma tradition. And Jamgon Mipham Rinpoche is universally respected as a sage who was able to, in almost miraculous degree, comprehend the teaching and communicate it. And we have an enormous body of work from Jamgon Mipham Rinpoche, spanning not just Buddhist epistemology and ontology or philosophy, but also all sorts of topics within the worldly context, right down to Mipham Rinpoche actually wrote a Kama Sutra. Now, sometimes the yogis, they would tease Jamgon Mipham Rinpoche saying he wrote it as a monk, he wrote it out of a theoretical understanding, lacking the experience. But at the same time, Jamgon Mipham Rinpoche, his role, you could say, was really just clarifying things that could be helpful for individuals. So according to the needs of beings anywhere, he would share his incredible knowledge. But this, of course, what we're looking at here is then particularly profound and relevant, and particularly for the modern person who is situated within a culture where very often there is confusion about what we're doing on the Buddhist path. So kindly generate this intention, prepare with bodhicitta, recognizing how this will be relevant for our project, our intention to free sentient beings from suffering. So we're presently studying what we then call the four reliances, the ones that are sitting up on top of the screen. And we're now looking at Vajrayana. And what we're first going to be looking at is what's called the 6 parameters and 4 styles of interpretation. They're very much they're very much elements that we find in Vajrayana. They're described as the Taduk Sulshi in Tibetan, the 6 parameters and 4 styles of interpretation. They're very much said as being, you could say, the bones of Vajrayana, the sort of heart of Vajrayana. But we can also see as we go through it here that they're understood differently in different contexts. And I would say it's not really something that we need to, again, carry with us. We'll be looking at something that's very provocative in terms of Vajrayana practice, just a bit further on. But first, we're going to go through these 6 and 4, which really constitute a fundamental way in which that's necessary to approach an understanding of the Vajrayana teaching. And that's again where we're looking at this very important point in the Buddhist teaching, which is how we should understand or interpret what is being spoken. And that, of course, depends on the audience. So we have so many different teachings spoken in many different ways for the benefit of the audience, for the benefit of their particular place in terms of their understanding. So here, Jakob Leschly in the root verses writes, the profound Vajrayana teachings are concealed through the 6 parameters and 4 styles of interpretation. They are established through flawless reasoning along with the key instructions of the lineage. So here we have the 6 and 4, and again, they're established on the basis of reasoning. So also when we approach Vajrayana, it's so important that we're not thinking that there's something that we're imagining, but it's entirely on the basis of reasoning, and not just emotional reasoning, like where we want to be right, but on the basis of hard, rigorous insight and logic. And this is expounded then particularly also with the instructions on the lineage. And that's where when we come to Vajrayana teaching, it's so dependent on having a teacher that actually clarifies the practice and the view and the practice. So commenting on the first 2 lines then about the 6 and the 4, it says, in relation to the Vajrayana being very profound and difficult to realize, the Heruka Galpo Tantra states, in the extensive explanation, the 6 parameters are the provisional meaning and the definitive meaning, the intentional and the unintentional, and the literal explanation and the non-literal explanation. So here then, the Khenpo comments, the 6 parameters consist of 3 contrasting pairs. The meaning is either provisional or not provisional. And that's again where we come back to, we're talking about what? We're talking about how we experience things conventionally. Yes, we have that in the Vajrayana. It says, repeat 3 times, or this was spoken at a particular place by a particular teacher. All that's relative. Not provisional is speaking about the unborn nature of reality, the space of suchness, and so forth. So that's the provisional and not provisional. There is either an implicit or non-implicit intention. That's where we're saying something directly. No, we're saying something where there's something that's inferred beyond what's being said, and not implicit intention is saying it directly. And finally, the words should be taken either literally or figuratively. And that's like we looked about a bit earlier, where it says you should kill your mother and father. Well, that's not to be taken literally. It's to be taken figuratively, understanding that the mother and father, in this case, are taken to refer to attachment and aversion, or ignorance and the aspects of ignorance. So that's continually necessary when we approach the Vajrayana teaching. The Khenpo goes on to say, in terms of practicing the secret mantra Vajrayana in general, there is another way of listing 6 parameters, which is found in the 8 Herukas. Now, I'll be a little bit naughty here and say I think the text would be referred to as the 6 Herukas, but then fortress, ravine, and life force. These are famously 3 aspects that define how we approach view, meditation, and action. Anyway, let's see here. It says, be decisive with the view, cross over with the conduct, establish the basis with samaya, progress in stages with empowerment, practice with deep meditation, and accomplish your goal with the key instructions. These are the 6 parameters. So that's where we refer to these 6 here, but just in terms of these famous and this is something once I was in a context where the Vajrayana teaching was being taught. There was one young lama, a tuku, was very famous for being very wrathful, and he all of a sudden he went, "Okay, guys, what's the fortress, ravine, and life force?" And the audience sitting there, we had no idea. And he rolled his eyes and said, "How could you ever expect to understand anything here if you don't know what is the fortress, ravine, and life force?" So, so that sort of stuck with me. And it essentially refers to then the fortress of the view, which has to be powerful, you could say, with a vast view. Ravine, tongue, actually refers to the fact that when you're practicing, you're going to go through various experiences. Here it's defined slightly differences. And the life force is that which enables us to continue practice, namely abiding by the Samaya. But here, the Khenpo then, and I actually put this in here in the text, defines it slightly different. And so anyway, the fortress, the ravine, and the life force means that the fortress of the view, Tao Et Zong, is the recognition of awareness. The ravine of meditation, Gompe Tang, is the visualization manifesting as undistracted awareness display and the life force of the action, Chebe So. And the life force of the action, Chebe So, is the application of ritualistic procedures. So again, here we have the view, the continual undistracted sustaining of the view in meditation, and the engagement or the integration of this through ritualistic procedures, Laglen. So this, of course, is also interesting because that is actually where we're referring to how the Vajrayana practices, such as sadhana, such as ritual, is entirely just a physical and verbal way to express the view and the meditation. And if we look, for example, in some of the liturgies that we have, let's say in the Rigzindupa or in the Vimaladrup or what have you, Vajrayana sadhana and the associated ritual aspects are all expressing the profoundest insight into the nature of reality. So that's where here then the view and the meditation is then simply integrated through the application of ritualistic procedures. So this is actually important because otherwise we tend to think of some of the rituals as being just rituals or something secondary in terms of practice. So it sort of enables us to have greater respect for the nature of the ritual. And it also encourages us, as we do the ritual, to not just consider it in terms of what are we supposed to be doing, or where are we in the text, or all these kind of things that if you're meditating, then you might follow in the text, you might not be able to follow in the text, you might do what's right, you might place the object in the left, you might place it in the right, but it doesn't really matter that much. There is overall just a sense of participating in something that expresses the sacred and is a natural manifestation of the view and meditation. So that's where this kind of insight, or you could say just recognizing this, enables us to not approach the practices such as we do in terms of tsok, in terms of just something about doing something, but rather as a profound integration. And then it says here, also related to Vajrayana practice, Padmasambhava says in Guru Rinpoche's response to the questions of the lady. This, by the way, I should actually have this in italics because it's a text, Jomo Shulen. And this is translated capably by Eric Pema Kunzang many years ago in a text called Dakini Teachings. So that's where it says, and you can see here the 6 parameters are defined entirely differently. It says the 6 parameters are the parameter of Vajrayana practice, the parameter of Guru Yoga practice, the parameter of the Guru's instructions, the parameter of experiencing the instructions, the parameter of practicing the experience, and the parameter of accomplishing the result. So here then, when we talk about the parameter of practicing the experience, I think we can also we can read this in terms of integrating the experience. Anyway, he says, the Khenpo says, the tantras of the secret mantra Vajrayana are explained through these 6 parameters because its statements and meanings never go beyond these 6 limits. So actually, that is how we very often translate these 6 limits, tadruk. So we would say that with that understanding of what the Vajrayana involves in terms of these 6 limits, we can understand the teachings of the Vajrayana. And then we have here, as for the 4 styles of interpretation, again, the Herukagalpa Tantra states, these are the literal, general, hidden, and ultimate. And again, these are ways in which we can approach the teaching. So here the Khenpo says, the literal way, the general way, the hidden way, and the ultimate way are the 4 styles of interpreting the meaning. Now, in the footnotes, it refers to Khenpo Palden Sherp's commentary on the 21 praises of Tara. And I actually found this on the web. And even though I haven't actually looked in there, I just thought I'd share it. And I put this in the resource folder. So if you want to consult this particular text where, like I say, I haven't actually looked and found it, but apparently then it's in there. You can find this in the resource folder in the Dropbox. Then the Khenpo says, beginning with the first, the literal meaning breaks down the sentences into words and explains the words according to the grammar texts. That's the literal. The general way of interpreting the Vajrayana can be illustrated with examples. If one regrets that one has not entered the blissful and quick path of Tantra, but instead has entered the slow and difficult path of Sutra, then the Sutra path is explained as a path to ascend to the path of Tantra. In other words, if we somehow are engaged in a context in which we are practicing exclusively Sutra, then it would be skillful if the teacher then says, look, you shouldn't regret what you're doing right now. This has a role in terms of the path to Tantra. For example, we have from Chögyal Dzogchen Lingpa a text called the Riksum Nyingtik. And the Riksum Nyingtik essentially is a heart essence teaching from the Great Perfection, but it includes all the 9 yanas. So in the Riksum Nyingtik, you have all the 9 yanas expounded. So that's where every single yana has its particular role in terms of the ascending to the path of Tantra. So that's one way in which we could say the way that Vajrayana can be presented. Then the Khenpo says, on the other hand, one might regret having entered the tantric path, thinking that a statement like the tantric path transcends the notions of dirty and clean. And we might then think means that one would become like dogs and pigs that have no discrimination. Or one might think like the ritual intercourse or ritual killing within the practices is the doctrine of heretics. However, unless one relinquishes attachment to the Sutrayana way of discriminating between clean and dirty, one will not understand the meaning of equality. So that's where, when we have these strange statements that I think most of us actually, I think, implicitly understand, but it's just comforting to know that there is a reason, but there is, there's a reason to the madness. There's a purpose to this, and that in this case is the meaning of equality. Then the Khenpo says also, if one has the right motivation, then anything can be meritorious. As in the story of the Buddha's previous life, like a ship captain who killed an armed criminal who was about to murder 500 merchants. Again, a famous story that you have in numerous places, including Words of My Perfect Teacher, where the Buddha's motivation, interestingly, was not really about the 500 merchants, but it was more that he could see the karmic repercussion that this person would experience if he went ahead with murdering. So that's where, again, it's about understanding the general meaning. And this everybody more or less, I would say, understands about the Vajrayana. The hidden meaning, and these are the things that we don't expose. This is where there's practices in the Vajrayana which, from the outside, would be unacceptable, but it even would also refer to some of the, for example, in Siddhartha's intent, we're discouraged from sending out emails that have wrathful deities or yabyum imagery. This doesn't always necessarily work out, but we actually have this, and that's exactly this. There are Vajrayana practices that, or you could say aspects of Vajrayana culture, that are just difficult to understand. So the Khenpo says here, the hidden meaning refers to the practice of the creation stage, the visualization, very often misunderstood, Kama Mudra, the practice of essentially engaging in sexual practices for the purpose of purifying obscurations and engendering the bliss that enables us to understand the nature of wisdom beyond ordinary concepts. And then the subtle body practices, such as holding tightly, which are again practices that have to do with working with nadi, prana, and bindu, as it says here, which are connected with channels, wind energy, and essence element. So all of these are difficult to understand for persons who don't understand the Vajrayana. And again, this is why very often these are practices and references that are hidden. The ultimate meaning refers to the realization of absolute luminosity and the unity of the two truths, being the ultimate nature just as it is. And that's again that is what Vajrayana is really about. And that's where there's absolutely no difference in terms of all the various Buddhist paths, in terms of their absolute objective is awakening, enlightenment. And so we have the ultimate meaning, and that's shared. The way in which the different traditions expound and understand this ultimate meaning, that might differ. But as far as the absolute, the experience and the nature of this absolute is concerned, that is the ultimate, and that's shared across all the various Buddhist teachings. Another way of stating these four styles of interpretation is that the literal meaning is like the syllables Om Ahum Shri or E Vam Maya, indicating the four kayas of the four chakras. So this we have, and if you study Light of Wisdom and also other Vajrayana texts, then very often these four syllables, they become the foundation for very elaborate explanations. The Khenpo write, the general meaning is like the Vajrayana understanding of the teachings, such as the paths and bhumis, which are held in common with Paramitayana. So that's where we have the literal, the four syllables, for example. The general meaning is that there is no conflict between the teachings of the Mantrayana and, say, the Paramitayana, the Mahayana in general. And then the Khenpo says the hidden meaning is like the subjects of the higher yanas that are not included in the lower yanas. And that is why it's hidden. There are certain practices which require certain preparations. For example, the practice of Kama Mudra that requires an enormous amount of training, not just in terms of having a higher view, but also in terms of actually having trained literally what we would say first having properly engaged a complete mastery of one's own body. And that includes what we call the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems and incredible, you could say, knowledge and capacity within the science of yoga. And it's only then on the basis of having trained one's own body that one can engage with another person as one's assistant or aid to the practice. So that's the kind of practice, for example, when Yeshe Tsogyal, on the basis of Padmasambhava's indication, she went to Nepal to find a worthy consort there. And that's where she met Acharya Saleh. But that kind of hidden practice is something that certainly is exclusive to the higher yanas. Then we have the ultimate meaning is like the timeless awareness of the Buddhas, which cannot be improved on by any yana view. And that is the unconditional nature of our reality, which is not in any way affected by our confusion or in any way improved through the attainment of awakening. This is the underlying condition of Buddha nature. So then, referring to the last two lines, from the perspective of the six parameters in the four styles of interpretation, the meaning of the Tantras exists in a hidden way by concealment, so that it does not appear to unfortunate ones with wrong views. And this again is where we see it, particularly in our culture, when we come across how the notions of Vajrayana or Tantra is completely misunderstood and sometimes hijacked. The valid key instructions of the lineage, which have come down from the Dharmakaya Samantabhadra to one's own root guru, are necessary for realizing the meaning of the Vajrayana. So that's where these key instructions, they're indispensable for actually approaching this. And again, the key instructions, they're premised again on persons having received the empowerment. So in this way, the Vajrayana is not approached that easily. It requires a lot of understanding, but at the same time, it's never as if these understandings and these particular parameters and styles of interpretation, they ever extend beyond the epistemic foundations that we find in the sutra teachings and in the Dharma in general. Now, the three views of the Nyingma lineage. And this, I think, is for many very interesting and very helpful in terms of appreciating what we're doing in the Vajrayana practice. It says, 77, all phenomena are a unity of primordial purity and great equality. The two types of accurate, valid cognition establish exactly what this means. So this is very often where we come across in Vajrayana liturgy what we call great purity and equality, or great purity and great equality. Tanyam Chimbo, Takpa, pure, Nyamba, equal, Chimbo, great. Tanyam Chimbo. And these are established, and this essentially refers to the two truths, but the two truths as experienced without confusion. And that's where we engage with the relative truth as mandala of deity and absolute truth that understands there's no difference between confusion and awakening. So we'll look at that here. So the Khenpo then, referring to the first two lines, all phenomena are a unity of primordial purity and great equality. He then says, to summarize the profound key points of the view of both Sutra and Tantra, the Nyingma lineage has its own terminology, which is called the three views. There is the view of phenomena, the view of the true nature, and the view of self-knowing awareness. Chechen, Cheni, Zhangjik. So first, the view of phenomena is the superior relative truth. So this is where we talk about the superior two truths, Tlakpe Dembani, Tlakpe Deni. And these are the two truths. But you could say, not the two truths as we normally understand it in terms of our confined understanding of reality, but from the point of view of reality as it is, the unity of appearance and emptiness. And that's where the Vajrayana comes at you could say, at the two truths, and particularly how it's explained in the Nyingma tradition. It understands the two truths when it comes to Vajrayana in terms of these two superior two truths. So here it says, this view unmistakably establishes the reality of all apparent phenomena as primordially divine appearance. And this view establishes that timeless awareness knows things as they are. This reasoning, which establishes the relative as great purity, is the view of phenomena. This is really significant for Vajrayana practitioners, and I say this particularly as someone who for decades has been involved in Vajrayana culture and encountered so much confusion, including my own confusion with regards to this material. And that's where we understand this divine perception, the seeing all phenomena in terms of infinite purity, deity, mantra, wisdom, and so forth, as not being something that we're imagining like some sort of gimmick or some sort of like therapeutical creative imagination, but rather an insight into reality, what it is, and visualization and the various practices that we find in the four empowerments as simply ways in which skillfully integrate an understanding of reality as it is, rather than how we see it in terms of our confined, impure perception. So that is, you could say, the great yoga of aligning ourselves with reality as it is, rather than how we conventionally perceive it in terms of our confusion. So that's particularly then with regards to the relative truth that is understood as primordially divine appearance. Now for the absolute truth, the Khenpo then says, second, the view of the true nature is the superior absolute truth. Primordially, all phenomena of samsara and nirvana are beyond all conceptual constructs. And that means whatever we have within our experience of confusion or awakening, the nature itself doesn't change. So that's where we say all phenomena, whatever there is ultimately not in any way contaminated by, tainted with, or influenced by the subjective experience of confusion. Nothing changes in terms of reality from the point of view of becoming enlightened. There's simply just that we're no longer separate from this primordial purity of great emptiness. So that's where, with regards to phenomena, with regards to what is, it says here, they, phenomena, are in the state of great emptiness, beyond the mind and its thoughts, words and expressions. In this state, the fruition of all the Buddhas, the 7 riches of the ultimate, which are then enlightened body, speech, mind, quality, activities, space, and wisdom, as well as notions of accepting what is good and rejecting what is bad, are equal. So that's why we refer to this, the superior absolute truth, in terms of this great equality. And that's where we speak about how in that equality there's no difference between samsara and nirvana, and within this state, we have the experience, or there is the riches of the enlightenment of all the Buddhas, in terms of the 5 wisdoms, or the 5 qualities of awakening, enlightened body, speech, quality, and activity, and also space and wisdom. So all of these then, including also concepts that we might have, and just keeping that as practitioners, keeping in mind this relationship that we have to our perceptions, that we judge some as bad and some as good. All of that in and of themselves, all such phenomena, they are beyond conceptual constructs. They are equal. They abide in the state of great emptiness. So this reasoning, which establishes the ultimate as great equality, is the view of the true nature. So we've looked at Chöchen-ki-tawa, the view of phenomena. Now we looked at Chönyi-ki-tawa, and the next is in Zhangri-ki-tawa in Tibetan, the view of phenomena, the view of the true nature, and now the view of self-knowing awareness. It says here, third, the view of self-knowing awareness is the superior 2 truths. These 2 truths are established from the perspective of appearance as purity, and from the perspective of emptiness as equality. So this is not introducing anything that we don't have all along the lines of the Mahayana, right from the time of the teachings on the Heart Sutra, where Avalokiteshvara says form is emptiness, emptiness is form, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness is no other than form. There's an understanding that all of our perceptions, all appearance, they exist free from the contaminations of what we might think or not think about them. And as such, they exist as appearance, and yet we cannot find anything tangible about them. They exist as emptiness. And here then, these 2 aspects, appearance and emptiness, they are discussed in the terms of purity and equality. This we just saw. And this is not something that we think. This is something that we remind ourselves, but in and of itself, these 2 truths are simply just how things are. And the view is more about us not being caught up in mistaken assumptions about reality, rather than us having to think something or imagine something. Simply just recognizing the truth of reality is the purpose of the 2 truths, or the appearance and equality. But that confusion which normally prevents us from seeing that is completely absent within the view of the self-knowing awareness. The self-knowing awareness does not fall into delusion, and so naturally within self-knowing awareness, these 2 truths are spontaneously accomplished. And so Khenpo says these 2 truths are inseparably present as one taste in all phenomena. Complete purity and great equality are experienced in a way that is self-illuminating and not an object. Self-illuminating means that it's known reflexively. It's known through knowing oneself. It is simply just looking at the mind and knowing the mind by the mind. So we call this Zhangri Zhangsel, or self-illuminating, reflexive awareness. So that's where within that single one taste, these two aspects of purity and equality are perfected. The Khenpo says they are combined as the single sphere of the Dharmakaya, the uncompounded unity of awareness and emptiness, the great magical net. And this is famously then the scope of what we call the Mahayoga, and for the Mahayoga teachings, which is the understanding of reality as the Dharmakaya. We have the famous root tantra, the Guhyagarbha Tantra, which is what expounds the understanding of how the ordinary confused perceptions never move from the sphere of the Dharmakaya, from the sphere of wisdom. And that's where we talk about all of reality as the great magical net, the Maya Jala. So the Khenpo says this is what is known by noble beings through their individual self-knowing wisdom. So this is the scope of sublime beings that are unconfused. So this is not something that we imagine. This is simply just what is there when we're no longer confused. This view of self-knowing awareness is a unity, the way of the great completeness, or Dzogchen. So of course we can appreciate, and this is what we particularly do in the practices of Mahayoga, we can understand how phenomena exists as mandala, deity, and so forth, on the basis of purity and as the basis of the unity of purity and equality. But in terms of how this actually abides beyond the constructs that we have, the skillful means of the constructs that we have in Mahayoga, then the very experience of it is the unconditional cognizance that is no longer contaminated with confusion, and as such exists as the spontaneously present self-knowing awareness, in which there's no division between appearance and emptiness and so forth. And that is engaged not through any other method than simply just remaining in the recognition of this self-knowing awareness. At that point, there's no contrivance or no method other than simply just resting in that state. And this is then referred to as the way of the great completeness, or Dzogchen. Okay, I'll just see if this, I'll just finish this. And it says, this understanding of reality is unmistakably established through the two types of valid cognition. The valid cognition that investigates authentic conventional reality, and the valid cognition that investigates ultimate reality. So remember, we've talked about these various kinds of valid cognition in which we have, when it comes to the conventional reality, that's where we can talk about the confined experience of conventional reality, namely the way that we ordinarily perceive the appearances on the basis of our dualistic grasping, and the way that conventional reality is understood when it's no longer contaminated by confusion. So that's what we then understand as authentic conventional reality. And then we have the valid cognition that investigates ultimate reality. There again, we have two kinds of understanding. One is the one that we understand through what we would refer to as the the one we understand as the categorized absolute. And that's, for example, what we arrive at when we study Madhyamika. When we study Madhyamika, we gain an understanding of how phenomena are free from the ordinary ideas we have about them, particularly thinking phenomena exist or they don't exist, that they have come into existence, they go out of existence, and where we are attributing an inherent existence to what are in fact just appearances and that have no reality whatsoever. And that's where that understanding is what we refer to as a categorized ultimate. It's an intellectual understanding. It's incredibly important in terms of eliminating our misconceptions about reality, but it is temporarily just a mental or a generic image, a dönchi. Whereas the uncategorized, and that's what we're talking about here, the uncategorized ultimate reality is the actual realization of phenomena, or rather of ultimate reality as it is. So that's where we have two kinds of valid cognition for the relative as understood through a confined understanding, and relative as understood through an authentic understanding. And similarly also we have two kinds of valid cognitions of the absolute, one that is understood by an ordinary conventional mind, and that which is realized on the basis of this self-knowing awareness. So that's probably might do it here for today. Let's see if there's some questions. Oh, thank you. Somebody very kindly highlighted. I shamefully must admit, yes, I forgot the motivation prayer to begin with. Normally we begin with invoking Jakob Leschly. That's so true. Should we do it now, even though better late than never? I actually had prepared it, you know. Okay, thank you. Through the blessing of awareness, emptiness, Manjushri Kumara, you open the expanse of wisdom and its 8 minds of confidence, thus mastering the great treasuries of transmission and realization. Mipham Manjushri Gosha, I supplicate you. Thank you very much for that. All right, any questions with regards to the material we've looked at? Please guide us on how to get Vajrayana empowerment for a beginner here. Well, the first thing we would want to do before we do anything Buddhist is first to really understand what are we doing in Buddhism. And that's where the present topic that we're approaching here is very important. And before we can gain Vajrayana empowerment, we actually need to really have a theoretical understanding as well as also processing. And particularly in the modern world, where the theory that we're equipped with through our educational systems completely fail to give any understanding of the enlightened nature. There's no understanding of enlightened nature within our ordinary culture. And as such, also, there's not really any understanding of what our relative confused experience is like. And on the basis of that, there's no notion of understanding what we mean with rebirth, what we mean with karma, and so forth. So the first thing we need to do, regardless of what Buddhist teaching we engage in, is to actually get a proper theoretical understanding. And then we need to have the processing through the practice of meditation, sitting practice, because otherwise we might engage in Vajrayana practice, but we'll be just looking at all the visualizations and the methods without really having an intuitive or experiential relationship to how these methods connect with Buddha nature, how we actually, and that is the scope of Vajrayana, how the Vajrayana methods, they are aligning ourselves with the condition of the unconfused, pure nature of our wisdom. If we do that simply just with our ordinary confused sort of assumptions and guesswork about what we're doing on the Vajrayana path, we won't really be sitting doing Vajrayana practice. We'll just be sitting reciting a lot of visualizations or thinking we should do this or should do that as an ordinary person. And that's where it's so important to have be processed first in a way in which we begin to see that our ordinary confusion is not that strong. And that while we humbly acknowledge that we are confused individuals, we also begin to see how this confusion is transparent, workable, and not what ultimately defines us. And that's where it's so helpful to then have a foundation of shamatha and vipassana practice. Again, I would very much recommend that when we're approaching Vajrayana practice and we're laying the foundations through sitting practice, it's very helpful if we receive these instructions within a Vajrayana context. So, for example, in the context of in India, you have at Deer Park in Beer, you have students of Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche that often present datuns. And it's in the context of datun that we really can get some experience of how sitting practice is approached from a Vajrayana within the context of Vajrayana culture. You might go to some of the other traditions, for example, Theravadan traditions that offer retreats on, Vipassana and so forth. And that's also very good. But then again, within these traditions, very often there's not an understanding really of Vajrayana what Vajrayana is. And so very often there's sort of a pervasive discourse that sort of has no appreciation for Vajrayana practice. And that's of course fine in some way, but it can be a bit discouraging. Very often I've had people who come and tell me, oh yeah, in this tradition they refer to Vajrayana as just rubbish and nonsense and so forth. So we're approaching you could say, laying the foundations in terms of doing proper shamatha vipassana practice. It's very helpful if we do that within Vajrayana culture. And then presently, Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche has been incredibly skillful in terms of introducing the practice of sitting meditation for the purpose of connecting with Vajrayana practice. So these are the foundations that are really indispensable before we approach Vajrayana and approach getting Vajrayana empowerment. So that's why also we can see so often how the practice of Vajrayana doesn't quite attain its full value unless there really is a proper foundation in terms of both theory and also preparation, experiential preparation. And I would say, once these things are in place, for sure, then Vajrayana empowerment, it will come. It will come organically on the basis of our merit and on the basis of our aspirations. You're very welcome. So next week, I can't remember, what did I say, that I'm going to do it or not? Anyway, I think I will try to do it next week. Let me just see here. It'll be difficult. I won't be able to do it next week. That will be I think the 7th, but I will be there on the 14th and the 21st. And I'm actually aiming at completing this then, and that's where the sessions might drag out a little bit longer. I'll try. I think we can actually complete the text. I'll try. And there's actually what I'll be doing is essentially reading the text, the commentary from the Kempo, which now is quite what remains now is mainly in terms of the last of the 4 reliances rely on wisdom, not on consciousness, and that's where the explanations will be about how wisdom is understood in terms of the 8 treasuries. So I'll be reading through that, and there's some quite succinct explanations of that, and I think we'll cover the remaining some 20-some verses reasonably quickly. So we're planning on completing then before Christmas, basically. But like I say, I won't be able to do it next Wednesday, a week from now, but I will be there on the Australian Eastern Daylight Saving Time on the 14th of December and the 21st. So I hope you can come for that. This text here is one of these. This text here really is such an important text, and like I was just saying, you'd almost wish that it's one of the first texts that anyone studies, and particularly the implications. And that's where all of you who have been looking at this text, you've been equipped with an understanding that really is a radical shift in terms of the common perception of Buddhism as what we very often hear, as a belief, as a religion and all of that. And rather this takes it into a realm which is about what we can ascertain validly on the basis of our personal direct experience and also on the basis of our logic. So these really are the two essential components of a valid understanding of what we're doing, and not in terms of something Buddhist, but in terms of something that has to do with our experience and has to do with the elements that define confusion and define freedom from confusion. All right, I think we'll conclude here then. Let's see. So next time, Vajrayana, practice of the definitive meaning. Okay. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you very much. And once again, I shall not be having a class next week, but the following. So we'll meet again on the 14th of December, 9 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Saving Time. Thank you very much.